How do you escape a friend who stalked you for months after you cut her off? I saw Vanessa's car parked outside my apartment at 6 in the morning on a Wednesday in March, the same silver Camry she'd been driving since college, and my stomach dropped because I'd blocked her number 3 weeks ago and told her explicitly never to contact me again. She sat in the driver's seat drinking coffee and staring at my building's entrance, waiting. I watched from my bedroom window for 20 minutes while she just sat there, not moving, not looking at her phone, just watching. When I finally left for work through the back exit, I checked over my shoulder every 30 seconds during the entire walk to the subway station. That evening, her car was there again. Same spot, same position, same coffee cup in her hand. This had been happening every morning and evening for 6 days straight, and I was starting to understand that blocking someone's number didn't make them disappear. The friendship had ended badly, but I'd thought it was actually over. 3 weeks earlier, I'd finally confronted Vanessa about the pattern I'd been ignoring for 2 years. The constant texts checking where I was and who I was with. The unannounced visits to my apartment that always happened when I was with other friends. The way she'd show up at bars or restaurants I'd mentioned going to, then act surprised to see me there. The crying phone calls at midnight when I didn't respond to her messages within an hour. The guilt trips about how I was her only real friend, and she didn't know what she'd do without me. I'd been making excuses for her behavior because we'd known each other since freshman year, because she'd been there for me during my breakup with my ex-boyfriend, because ending a 7-year friendship felt cruel and dramatic. But my roommate Priya had finally said what I'd been avoiding. Vanessa wasn't being a good friend. She was being obsessive and controlling, and I needed to set boundaries before it got worse. So I'd met Vanessa at a coffee shop and told her I needed space. I'd practiced the speech with Priya, tried to be kind but firm, explained that her constant need for my attention was overwhelming and unhealthy for both of us. I said I wanted to take a break from the friendship for a few months while we both figured out healthier ways to relate to people. Vanessa had stared at me across the table with this expression I couldn't read, not crying, not angry, just completely blank. Then she'd asked if this was because of Priya, if Priya had been telling me lies about her, if I was choosing Priya over her after everything we'd been through together. I said no, this was about the two of us and the dynamic that wasn't working. She'd nodded slowly, said she understood, gathered her things, and left without another word. I'd felt relieved and guilty in equal measure, thinking maybe she'd actually accepted it gracefully. 2 days later, the text started. First, a long message about how she'd been thinking about our conversation and realized I was right, that she'd been too dependent on me, that she wanted to work on herself and maybe we could talk again in a few weeks. I didn't respond. Then another message asking if I'd gotten her first message, if my phone was working okay, if everything was all right. I didn't respond to that either. Then messages became more frequent. 3, then 5, then 8 per day. Asking what I was doing, telling me about her day, sharing memes she thought I'd find funny, acting as if we were still in regular contact. After 4 days of this, I sent one message back. Vanessa, I asked for space. Please respect that and stop texting me. She responded immediately. I'm sorry, I just miss you, I'll stop. But she didn't stop. The text continued, now with a different tone. She was worried about me. Had she done something specific to upset me? Could we just talk for 5 minutes to clear the air? She deserved to know what she'd done wrong so she could fix it. I blocked her number. She started calling from different numbers. Work phone, her mother's phone, numbers I didn't recognize. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. She started emailing. Long, rambling messages about our friendship, memories from college, how much I meant to her, how she was struggling without me, how she'd never had a friend as close as me, how I was abandoning her when she needed me most. I blocked her email. She created new email addresses. I set up filters to automatically delete anything from her. She found me on every social media platform I had and sent messages there. I blocked her on everything. That's when she started showing up in person. First, it was at the grocery store near my apartment. I turned a corner in the produce section and there she was, standing by the tomatoes, staring at me. She smiled and waved and started walking toward me. I turned my cart around and left immediately, abandoning my half-full basket. My heart was pounding as I walked home, looking over my shoulder every few steps. That evening, Priya asked why I'd come home without groceries, and I told her what happened. Priya's expression went dark and serious. She said that wasn't normal behavior, that Vanessa was escalating, that I should document everything and consider getting a restraining order. I said that felt extreme. We'd been best friends for 7 years. Maybe she just needed time to process the friendship ending. Priya asked how much time I was willing to give her before I admitted this was stalking. The next appearance was at the coffee shop where I worked remotely twice a week. I'd been there for an hour when Vanessa walked in, ordered a coffee, and sat 3 tables away from me. She didn't approach or try to talk to me, just sat there with her laptop open, occasionally glancing in my direction. I packed up my things and left. She followed me out, maintaining distance but definitely following. I walked 4 blocks in the wrong direction before ducking into a department store and hiding in the bathroom for 15 minutes. When I came out and went back outside, she was gone. I took a rideshare home instead of the subway, too shaken to risk having her follow me onto public transportation. That evening, I started a document on my computer titled Vanessa Incidents and began logging everything with dates and times. The car surveillance started the next week. I'd noticed her silver Camry parked on my street when I left for work in the morning, always within view of my building's entrance. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but it happened 3 mornings in a row, and each time I saw her sitting in the driver's seat, watching. On the 4th morning, I walked directly to her car and knocked on the window. She rolled it down and smiled at me. "Hi, I was just in the neighborhood." I asked her why she was parked outside my apartment at 7 in the morning. She said she'd been visiting a friend nearby and was about to leave. I told her to stop following me, stop showing up places I went, stop trying to contact me. She said she wasn't following me, that I was being paranoid, that it was a free country and she could park wherever she wanted. Her voice was calm and reasonable, which somehow made it worse. I walked away and called Priya from the subway platform, my hands shaking. Priya said I needed to file a police report immediately. I said the police wouldn't do anything about someone parking on a public street. Priya said I needed to start creating an official record even if they couldn't act yet, that stalking cases built up over time through documentation. She offered to come with me to the police station that evening. We went after work, and I explained the situation to an officer at the front desk who looked bored and skeptical. He took my information and Vanessa's information and said someone would call me if they needed additional details. He didn't write anything down beyond my name and phone number. Priya asked about restraining orders, and the officer said I'd need evidence of credible threats or harassment, that showing up in public places wasn't enough. Priya asked what would be enough. The officer shrugged and said typically they needed threats of violence, evidence of breaking into property, or proof of repeated unwanted contact after being told to stop. I mentioned the hundreds of texts and emails and calls. He asked if I documented them. I said I'd deleted most of them after blocking her. He said that made it harder to prove. I left the station feeling frustrated and stupid. That night, I went through my phone and recovered what texts I could from backup files. I printed out emails from before I'd set up the filters. I created a comprehensive timeline in my Vanessa incidents document, noting every appearance, every call from an unknown number, every time I'd seen her car. Priya helped me set up a system to automatically save any future contact attempts, and she installed a security camera app on my phone so I could record interactions if they happened. She also made me promise that I wouldn't engage with Vanessa anymore, no matter what. Responding only encouraged her and gave her what she wanted, which was my attention. I needed to treat her as if she didn't exist, document everything, and wait until I had enough evidence for legal action. It felt passive and helpless, but Priya insisted it was the only way. The surveillance continued daily. Every morning, Vanessa's car was outside my building. Every evening when I came home from work, it was there again. Sometimes she'd be sitting in it, sometimes it would be empty. I started varying my schedule, leaving at different times, taking different routes to the subway. She adapted. If I left at 6:45 instead of 7, her car would be there at 6:45. If I walked 3 blocks north to a different subway station, her car would be parked near that station the next day. She was learning my patterns and adjusting her surveillance to match. I felt watched constantly, even when I couldn't see her. The stress was affecting my sleep, my work, my ability to function normally. I'd lost 8 pounds in 3 weeks because my anxiety killed my appetite. My boss noticed I seemed distracted and asked if everything was okay. I said I was dealing with a personal situation but didn't elaborate. Then Vanessa started contacting my other friends. My college roommate Bethany called me confused, saying Vanessa had messaged her asking if I was okay, if I seemed angry or unstable lately, if Bethany knew why I'd suddenly cut Vanessa off without explanation. Bethany had responded saying she didn't know anything about it, and Vanessa had sent her long messages about how worried she was about me, how I'd changed since living with Priya, how she thought Priya was isolating me from my real friends. Bethany had found it weird and intrusive and wanted to know what was actually going on. I explained the situation, and Bethany said she'd block Vanessa and ignore any further contact. But 2 days later, another friend called with a similar story. Then another. Vanessa was systematically reaching out to everyone in my social circle, trying to gather information or turn people against me or both. I called my mother and told her what was happening. My mother said it sounded concerning, but maybe Vanessa was just having trouble letting go of an important friendship. She suggested I write Vanessa one final message clearly stating my boundaries, then block her everywhere and move on with my life. I explained I'd already done that multiple times, that the blocking hadn't stopped anything, that Vanessa was now showing up in person and surveilling my apartment. My mother went quiet, then said I should consider moving if it was that bad. I said I'd just signed a lease renewal and couldn't afford to break it. She offered to help with the costs if necessary because my safety was more important than money. The fact that my mother, who'd taught me to be polite and accommodating and give people the benefit of the doubt, was suggesting I flee my home to escape a friend, made the severity of the situation feel real in a new way. Priya started researching restraining orders and discovered we needed to apply through family court since Vanessa and I weren't related and she hadn't committed a crime yet. The application required detailed evidence of harassment causing reasonable fear for my safety. Priya helped me prepare a packet with my timeline, screenshots of messages, photos of Vanessa's car outside my apartment, statements from friends she'd contacted, and a written description of how her behavior was impacting my daily life. The application process would take several weeks and required a court hearing where I'd have to face Vanessa and explain to a judge why I needed protection. The idea of sitting in a room with her, presenting evidence while she stared at me, made me physically ill. But Priya insisted it was necessary, that this wouldn't stop on its own, that Vanessa's behavior was escalating and would continue escalating until someone forced her to stop. Before I could file the application, things got worse. I came home from work one evening to find flowers on my doorstep. Expensive flowers, the kind you order from a real florist, not a grocery store bouquet. The card said, "I miss you," in Vanessa's handwriting. I left them on the doorstep and went inside, but seeing them every time I came in or out of my building for the next 3 days before they died felt violating. She knew exactly where I lived, which floor, which apartment. She'd been inside my building to leave them at my door. 2 days after the flowers appeared, I found a gift bag hanging on my doorknob. Inside was a framed photo of Vanessa and me from college graduation, both of us smiling with our arms around each other. On the back, she'd written, "Remember when we were happy?" I threw it in the dumpster and then worried she might be watching to see my reaction. That night, I filed the restraining order application. Priya came with me to the courthouse and helped me fill out all the forms. The clerk said a hearing would be scheduled within 30 days, and Vanessa would be served notice to appear. In the meantime, there was nothing preventing her from continuing her current behavior. I asked if there was any temporary protection available, and the clerk said not unless I could prove immediate danger. The surveillance and unwanted gifts didn't meet that threshold. I left the courthouse feeling defeated, knowing that filing the application would alert Vanessa to what I was doing and might make her escalate further before the hearing happened. Priya tried to be encouraging, saying at least the legal process had started, that we were taking action instead of just enduring. But I felt exposed and scared in a way I hadn't before. Vanessa was served with the restraining order notice 3 days later. I knew because that evening, she was standing outside my building's front entrance when I came home from work. Not in her car, standing directly in front of the door, blocking my path. My heart started racing as I approached, and I pulled out my phone to start recording. She didn't move. "We need to talk about this restraining order," she said, her voice tight and controlled. I said we didn't need to talk about anything, and I needed her to move so I could enter my building. She said I was being dramatic and cruel, that we'd been best friends for 7 years and I was treating her as if she was dangerous. I said her behavior was dangerous and I was documenting this interaction. She laughed, actually laughed, and said good luck convincing a judge that she was dangerous when all she'd done was care about our friendship. I pushed past her and entered my building, my hands shaking as I tried to get my key in the door. She called after me saying I couldn't hide from her forever, that we lived in the same city and I'd have to face her eventually. I got inside and immediately called the police. An officer came 40 minutes later and took my statement. I showed him the video I'd recorded of Vanessa blocking my entrance and confronting me about the restraining order. He said he could issue a warning but couldn't arrest her for standing on a public sidewalk. I asked what she'd have to do to actually face consequences. He said without a restraining order already in place, his hands were tied. He'd file a report and the confrontation would be on record for my court hearing, but that was all he could do. After he left, I sat on my couch crying with frustration and fear while Priya held my hand and assured me the hearing was only 3 weeks away. The next morning, Vanessa's car was outside my apartment as usual, but this time when I left for work, she got out and followed me on foot. She stayed about 20 feet behind me the entire walk to the subway station, matching my pace when I sped up, maintaining distance but making her presence obvious. I didn't look back or acknowledge her, just kept walking while recording on my phone in my pocket. On the subway platform, she stood at the other end, watching me. When my train came, she got in a different car. I had no idea if she'd follow me to my office building, so I got off 3 stops early and took a rideshare the rest of the way. I arrived at work 40 minutes late and told my boss I needed to talk to him about a personal safety issue that might affect my schedule and work performance. He was understanding and said I should do whatever I needed to stay safe, that work flexibility wasn't a problem. That evening, I took a rideshare directly home instead of the subway. But Vanessa's car was parked outside my building when I arrived, and she was sitting in it, watching. I had the rideshare driver wait while I ran inside. Priya was home and came down to check if Vanessa was still there. She was. Priya went out and approached her car, knocked on the window, and told her directly that she was harassing me, that her behavior was being documented and reported, that she needed to leave and not come back. Vanessa rolled down her window and told Priya to mind her own business, that this was between her and me, that Priya was the reason our friendship had ended and she wasn't going to let Priya turn me against her. Priya said she was calling the police and pulled out her phone. Vanessa started her car and drove away, but not before shouting that Priya would regret interfering in things she didn't understand. Priya filed her own police report about being threatened. The officer who responded said Vanessa's statement about Priya regretting interference could be interpreted as a threat and would be added to the growing file. He said the accumulation of reports was helpful for my restraining order case, that it demonstrated a pattern of escalating harassment. He also suggested I consider staying somewhere else until the court hearing, that Vanessa clearly knew my schedule and routine and was comfortable approaching me. I said I refused to be driven out of my own home by someone I'd been friends with in college. The officer said he understood, but personal pride wasn't worth my safety. That night, I packed a bag and went to stay with my mother in New Jersey. Leaving felt humiliating and infuriating, but I was exhausted from constant vigilance and needed to sleep without wondering if Vanessa was outside my window. I stayed with my mother for 2 weeks. My daily commute to work in Manhattan became 90 minutes each way, but at least I wasn't being followed or surveilled. My mother treated me gently, asked careful questions about how I was holding up, made my favorite foods, tried to distract me with movies and conversation. She also asked me questions about the friendship that made me examine how I'd missed the warning signs. When had Vanessa's behavior first seemed possessive? Had there been other friends she'd driven away? Had I noticed her becoming angry or punishing when I spent time with other people? The answers were uncomfortable. The signs had been there for years. I just normalized them because Vanessa had been good at framing her controlling behavior as caring deeply, her jealousy as loyalty, her obsession as friendship. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in late April. I took the day off work and met Priya at the courthouse. My mother came too for moral support. We waited in a hallway outside the courtroom and I felt sick with anxiety. Then Vanessa arrived with her own mother, both dressed professionally, looking calm and put together. Vanessa's mother glared at me across the hallway. Vanessa didn't make eye contact, just sat beside her mother and whispered to her occasionally. My lawyer, a young woman named Rachel Steinberg who specialized in harassment cases, reviewed my evidence one final time and told me to stay calm and answer questions directly, to not let Vanessa or her attorney rattle me. The judge would decide based on whether I'd proven a pattern of harassment causing reasonable fear. The hearing started with the judge reviewing my application and the evidence I'd submitted. Rachel presented my timeline, showed photos of Vanessa's car outside my apartment with timestamps, played the video of her confronting me outside my building, showed screenshots of messages from before I'd blocked her, and presented statements from friends Vanessa had contacted. The judge asked me questions about the friendship's history, why I'd ended it, what specific behaviors frightened me. I explained the constant texts and calls and emails despite being blocked, the surveillance that happened daily for weeks, the following me to work, the gifts left at my door, the confrontation after she was served with the hearing notice. I described how I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't live normally because I felt watched and pursued constantly. My voice shook when I spoke, but I got through it. Vanessa's attorney, an older man named Gordon Phelps who had a patronizing tone, argued that I was mischaracterizing normal attempts to repair a friendship. He said Vanessa had been hurt by the sudden end of a 7-year friendship and was trying to understand what had happened. He claimed the texts and calls were attempts at communication, not harassment. He said the appearances at public places were coincidental, or the result of living in the same city and having overlapping social circles. He argued the car being on my street was legal parking and I couldn't prove Vanessa was surveilling me just because her car was parked legally. He made it sound as if I was being oversensitive and vindictive, punishing Vanessa for caring too much. The judge asked him about the confrontation outside my building after Vanessa was served notice. He said his client had a right to express her feelings about the legal action I was taking against her. Then Vanessa testified. She cried as she spoke, describing how devastated she'd been when I'd suddenly ended our friendship without real explanation. She said I'd been her closest friend since college, that she'd supported me through difficult times, that I'd abandoned her when she needed me most. She admitted to texting and calling frequently, but said she'd been seeking closure and understanding, not harassing me. She admitted to being at locations where I was, but insisted they were coincidental, or that she'd gone to familiar places we used to go together, not realizing I'd still be there. She said she'd left flowers and a photo as peace offerings, hoping to remind me of the good times we'd shared. She denied following me on foot to the subway station, said she happened to be going the same direction. She made herself sound heartbroken and confused, made me sound cold and irrational. The judge asked Vanessa directly if she understood that I'd asked her multiple times to stop contacting me. She said yes, but she'd hoped I'd change my mind if she gave me time and space to see how much the friendship had meant. The judge asked if she understood that continuing to contact someone after being asked to stop was harassment. Vanessa said she hadn't thought of it that way, that she'd thought we were going through a rough patch that would resolve. The judge asked about the car being parked outside my apartment every morning and evening for weeks. Vanessa said she worked nearby and that was a convenient parking spot. The judge asked where exactly she worked. Vanessa gave an address that was 15 blocks from my apartment, nowhere near convenient. The judge pointed out that inconsistency. Vanessa stammered and said she'd been visiting a friend in the area. The judge asked the friend's name and address. Vanessa couldn't provide one immediately. The judge called a brief recess and said he'd issue his decision after lunch. My mother bought me a sandwich I couldn't eat. Priya said she thought it had gone well, that the judge seemed skeptical of Vanessa's explanations and my evidence was solid. Rachel said she was cautiously optimistic but reminded me that judges had a lot of discretion in these cases. We went back to the courtroom 90 minutes later and waited while the judge reviewed his notes. Then he delivered his ruling. He found that I had proven a pattern of harassment that caused reasonable fear for my safety. He granted a restraining order valid for 1 year, renewable if necessary. Vanessa was prohibited from contacting me directly or through third parties, from coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, from sending messages through any medium, and from following or surveilling me. Violation would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Vanessa started crying loudly as the judge read the terms. Her mother put an arm around her. Vanessa's attorney requested a stay of the order pending an appeal. The judge denied it, saying the order was effective immediately. A bailiff served Vanessa with the formal order right there in the courtroom. As we left, Vanessa was still crying, and her mother was glaring at me with undisguised hatred. In the hallway, Rachel warned me that the first few days after a restraining order was issued were often when violations happened because the person felt desperate or angry about losing control. She told me to document anything, any contact attempt or appearance, and report it immediately to police. She gave me her cell number and said to call if anything concerning happened. Priya and my mother and I went to lunch to celebrate, but I felt too anxious to feel relieved. The order was just paper unless Vanessa actually followed it. For 3 days, nothing happened. No car outside my apartment, no following, no contact attempts. I started to hope that maybe the legal consequence had actually worked, that Vanessa had finally accepted the situation. Then, on the 4th day, I got a call from an unknown number while I was at work. I didn't answer. The caller left a voicemail. It was Vanessa's voice, shaking with anger or tears or both. "You're destroying my life with this restraining order. I can't believe you'd do this to someone who loved you. I just want to talk, to understand what I did wrong. Please just call me back so we can fix this." I saved the voicemail and called Rachel immediately. She said to report it to the police as a violation. I did. The police said they'd send an officer to contact Vanessa and warn her, but since it was a first violation, they'd likely just document it unless it continued. 2 days later, I received flowers at my workplace. Expensive flowers again, delivered by a service, with a card saying, "I'm sorry for everything, but no name." I couldn't prove they were from Vanessa, but I photographed them and the card and reported it anyway. The police said anonymous gifts weren't technically violations they could act on without proof of who sent them. That evening, Vanessa's mother called my cell phone from her number, which wasn't blocked. She launched into a tirade about how I'd ruined her daughter's life over nothing, how Vanessa was depressed and barely eating, how I was a cruel person who'd led her daughter on and then abandoned her when she needed support. I recorded the call and told her she was violating the restraining order by contacting me on Vanessa's behalf. She said she was a concerned mother protecting her child from a vindictive person. I hung up and reported the call. The police visited Vanessa and her mother and warned them both that any further contact would result in arrest. The warnings seemed to work for a while. 2 weeks passed with no contact, no car outside my building, no appearances. I started sleeping better, eating normally, feeling safe again. Priya said maybe the legal consequences had finally made it real for Vanessa. My mother suggested I consider therapy to process the trauma of being stalked by someone I'd trusted. I made an appointment with a therapist who specialized in harassment and stalking victims. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a severe violation of boundaries and autonomy, that the fear and hypervigilance I'd felt were normal responses to being pursued, that healing would take time. She also warned me that stalkers often had cycles of escalation and quiet periods, that I should stay alert even during calm periods. The therapist was right. 4 weeks after the restraining order was issued, Vanessa appeared outside my apartment again. Not in her car this time, standing on the sidewalk across the street, watching my building. I saw her from my window when I woke up at 6:30 on a Saturday morning. She was just standing there, had possibly been there for hours. I called the police immediately. They arrived 20 minutes later and approached her. I watched from my window as they spoke to her. She was crying and gesturing, clearly upset. They appeared to be explaining something to her, pointing down the street as if telling her to leave. She walked away slowly, looking back at my building several times. The officers came to my apartment and said they'd warned her she was violating the restraining order by being within 500 feet of my residence. She'd claimed she was just walking through the neighborhood and hadn't realized she was near my building, which they didn't believe but couldn't definitively disprove. They said if she appeared again, they'd arrest her. She appeared again 3 days later, this time at the coffee shop near my office where I sometimes worked remotely. I was on my laptop when I saw her walk past the window outside, then circle back and stand there, staring in at me. I packed up immediately and went to the counter to tell the barista I was being stalked and to please call the police if the woman outside came inside. The barista, a young guy named Kevin, looked alarmed and said he'd watch the door. I called the police from inside the coffee shop. Vanessa saw me on the phone and walked away before they arrived. The responding officers took my statement and said the pattern was concerning, that Vanessa was testing the boundaries of the restraining order by appearing places and leaving before they could respond. They suggested I file for an extension of the order and document every sighting meticulously. One officer said they'd increase patrols near my apartment and workplace, but they couldn't provide personal protection. I went back to family court with Rachel and filed for a violation hearing and extension of the restraining order. The violation hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In that time, Vanessa appeared outside my apartment 4 more times. Each time I called the police. Each time she left before they arrived or claimed she was just passing through the neighborhood. The officers were getting frustrated too, saying they understood Vanessa was violating the spirit of the order, even if she was technically staying 500 feet away, or leaving before they could measure the distance. They said the violation hearing would hopefully result in stricter enforcement or criminal charges. Meanwhile, I was back to the hypervigilance and fear I'd felt before the first restraining order, constantly checking over my shoulder, varying my routes, documenting everything obsessively. The violation hearing had a different judge, a woman named Judge Carolyn Foster, who'd reviewed my file before the hearing. She looked stern as she called Vanessa and her attorney to explain the allegations. Vanessa's attorney argued that his client had been in public spaces and hadn't directly contacted me, that being in the same general area of the city wasn't a violation. Judge Foster asked if he was seriously arguing that appearing outside my apartment and workplace multiple times after being ordered to stay away was coincidental. He said people had rights to move freely in public spaces. Judge Foster said those rights ended when someone had a restraining order prohibiting them from approaching specific locations. She reviewed the police reports from each incident, noted the pattern of Vanessa appearing and leaving just before police arrived, and said it was clear Vanessa was deliberately violating the order while trying to maintain plausible deniability. Judge Foster asked Vanessa directly why she kept appearing near my home and workplace. Vanessa said she had friends in the area and was trying to live her life, that she couldn't avoid an entire neighborhood just because I lived there. Judge Foster asked her to name the friends and their addresses. Vanessa couldn't. Judge Foster asked if she had any legitimate reason to be on my street or outside the coffee shop near my office. Vanessa said she was job hunting and had interviews in the area. Judge Foster asked for documentation of these interviews. Vanessa couldn't provide any. Judge Foster said she'd heard enough. She found Vanessa in violation of the restraining order and extended it for an additional 2 years. She also ordered Vanessa to complete a court-mandated mental health evaluation and treatment program focused on boundary issues and obsessive behavior. Vanessa started to protest, and Judge Foster cut her off. She said the next violation would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges for stalking and harassment, that she'd given Vanessa multiple chances to comply and her patience was exhausted. After the hearing, Rachel said the mental health mandate was significant because it created documentation of Vanessa's behavior in clinical terms. If she didn't comply or if the evaluation found serious issues, it would strengthen any future legal action. She also said Judge Foster's tone suggested she'd have no problem issuing criminal charges if Vanessa violated again. I felt more hopeful leaving that hearing than I had in months. Priya hugged me and said maybe Vanessa would finally understand the seriousness of the situation. My mother said she was proud of me for standing up for myself and following through with legal action, even though it was difficult and scary. I went home that night and slept without anxiety for the first time in weeks. The peace lasted 2 months, long enough that I started to believe it might actually be over. Then I came home from work on a Thursday evening to find my apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but things had been moved, rearranged, touched. Someone had gone through my belongings carefully and deliberately. Photos on my dresser were in different positions. Clothes in my closet were rearranged. My laptop was open on my desk when I'd left it closed. My journal, which I kept in a locked drawer, was on my bed open to entries where I'd written about Vanessa. The violation of privacy was worse than if things had been stolen. Someone had been in my most personal space, touching my most personal belongings. I called the police immediately, called Priya, called my mother, all while standing in the hallway outside my apartment because I couldn't bear to be inside. The police treated it seriously this time because breaking and entering was an actual crime unlike the previous harassment. They dusted for fingerprints, photographed the disturbed items, interviewed neighbors about suspicious activity. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Dorothy who lived across the hall, said she'd seen a young woman with dark hair outside my apartment that afternoon around 3 o'clock. The woman had been trying keys in my lock, and when Dorothy asked if she needed help, the woman said she was my sister, and I'd asked her to pick something up but gave her the wrong key. Dorothy had accepted this explanation and gone back inside. The police showed Dorothy a photo of Vanessa. Dorothy confirmed that was the woman she'd seen. The police issued a warrant for Vanessa's arrest for breaking and entering and violating a restraining order. Vanessa was arrested at her apartment that evening. According to the police, she'd initially denied being at my apartment but couldn't explain how my journal had ended up open to entries about her, or how the neighbor identified her. During questioning, she'd broken down and admitted she'd gone to my apartment because she needed to understand why I'd cut her off, that reading my journal would help her see what I was thinking. She'd found a spare key I'd given her years ago during the friendship and hadn't returned. She claimed she hadn't stolen anything, hadn't meant to hurt me, just wanted closure. The police said her admission was recorded and would be used as evidence. She was held overnight and arraigned the next morning on criminal charges including breaking and entering, stalking, and violating a protective order. The arraignment resulted in Vanessa being held on bail set at $15,000. Her mother posted it the same day, and Vanessa was released with conditions including weekly check-ins with a probation officer, mandatory mental health treatment, GPS monitoring via ankle bracelet, and strict compliance with the restraining order. Any violation would result in immediate rearrest and bail revocation. Rachel called me with updates and said the criminal charges were serious, that Vanessa was facing potential jail time if convicted. She also said the GPS monitoring meant police would be alerted if Vanessa came within 500 feet of my home or workplace, that I finally had real protection. I felt relieved and also sad that it had required someone breaking into my home to get actual legal consequences. The criminal trial was scheduled for 3 months later. In the meantime, I moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, changed my phone number, locked down all my social media accounts, and told only a handful of people where I was living. Priya came with me to apartment viewings and helped me move. My mother contributed to the security deposit. The new apartment had a doorman and security cameras in the lobby, features I'd never cared about before, but now considered essential. I paid for a P.O. box for mail forwarding so Vanessa couldn't find my new address through public records. The level of security I now needed to feel safe in my own life felt absurd and infuriating, but it was necessary. The trial happened in September, 6 months after Vanessa had broken into my apartment. I testified about the entire history of harassment, from the initial friendship ending through the stalking, the first restraining order, the continued violations, and finally the break-in. The prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence including police reports, my documentation, testimony from Priya and other friends, the neighbor's identification, and Vanessa's own recorded admission. Vanessa's defense attorney tried to paint her as mentally ill and needing treatment rather than punishment, arguing she'd been obsessed but not dangerous. The prosecutor countered that breaking into someone's home to read their private journal was absolutely dangerous and violated every boundary of acceptable behavior. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. Judge Foster, the same judge from the violation hearing, was assigned to the case. She reviewed Vanessa's mental health evaluation, which diagnosed her with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder and attachment issues. The evaluation recommended long-term therapy, but noted that Vanessa showed limited insight into her behavior and minimal remorse. Judge Foster sentenced Vanessa to 18 months in county jail with credit for time served, 3 years probation upon release, mandatory mental health treatment for the duration of probation, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with me for 10 years. Judge Foster said Vanessa's behavior had been calculated and persistent, had caused severe emotional harm, and required serious consequences to protect me and prevent her from targeting others. I didn't attend sentencing. Rachel went on my behalf and called me afterward with the outcome. I felt hollow when she told me, not triumphant or relieved, just empty. 18 months seemed both too much and not enough for what Vanessa had put me through. 3 years probation seemed inadequate insurance against future harassment. 10 years of protection sounded like a long time, but also meant I'd be 36 before I could fully stop looking over my shoulder. Rachel said I should be proud of seeing this through, that many stalking victims gave up because the legal process was so difficult and exhausting. She said I'd protected myself and created legal precedent that might help others in similar situations. I thanked her and hung up and cried, not from sadness, but from finally releasing months of tension. Therapy helped me process everything over the following year. My therapist explained that being stalked by someone you'd trusted created complex trauma, that I'd need time to rebuild my sense of safety and ability to trust people. She helped me understand that Vanessa's behavior wasn't my fault, that I hadn't caused it by ending the friendship, and I couldn't have prevented it by handling things differently. Some people couldn't accept boundaries and escalated when you tried to enforce them. The best I could have done was exactly what I did: document everything, pursue legal protection, and refuse to engage. She also helped me identify what red flags I'd missed early in the friendship so I could recognize unhealthy attachment patterns in future relationships. I never heard from Vanessa again directly. About a year into her jail sentence, her mother sent me a letter through Rachel's office asking me to write a letter supporting early release for good behavior. The letter claimed Vanessa had made progress in therapy and deeply regretted her actions. Rachel advised me not to respond, and I didn't. Vanessa served the full 18 months and was released on probation. I received notification of her release through the victim notification system and immediately upgraded my apartment's security and renewed all my privacy protections. But the GPS monitoring remained in place, and I received no alerts about her coming near my home or workplace. As far as I knew, she'd moved to a different state after release and was complying with probation terms. 2 years after the trial, I was living a normal life again. I'd been promoted at work, was dating someone kind and respectful who knew my history and understood my need for clear boundaries, and had rebuilt my sense of safety enough to go places without constantly checking over my shoulder. Priya and I were still roommates and closer than ever after everything we'd been through. My mother visited regularly and always commented on how much healthier and happier I seemed. The therapist agreed I'd made significant progress in healing from the trauma. I still had moments of anxiety when I saw someone who looked similar to Vanessa or noticed a car that seemed to be following the same route as me, but those moments passed quickly instead of spiraling into panic. The permanent restraining order wouldn't expire for another 8 years, and I'd renew it when the time came. Some people might think that was excessive after so much time had passed, but I'd learned that protecting yourself wasn't excessive when someone had demonstrated they couldn't respect boundaries. The legal documents, the court orders, the criminal conviction were all insurance policies against someone who'd shown me exactly who she was when she couldn't have what she wanted. I'd escaped by refusing to minimize her behavior, by documenting relentlessly, by pursuing every legal avenue available, and by accepting that someone I trusted could become someone I needed protection from. The escape wasn't dramatic or satisfying. It was methodical and exhausting and necessary. And finally, permanently, mine. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.